A grown adult once told me, completely straight-faced, that Antarctica is a 150-foot ice wall guarded by the world's militaries. And we've got 49 of these lined up. Gravity getting dismissed as just density, pilots supposedly pointing their planes nose down just to follow a curve that apparently doesn't exist, and NASA allegedly filming every rocket launch at a very specific angle just to hide the edge of a flat disk. If you can get through this entire list without laughing out loud even once, I genuinely don't believe you. Smash that subscribe button right now, because agreeing with even one of these is way more embarrassing than clicking it. 1. In a small town in Ohio, a woman insisted the Earth could not be spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. She told her nephew that if it were true, her trampoline would launch her straight into the next county. Her nephew laughed so hard he nearly fell off the porch. She stood firm and said science was clearly lying to children. Her grandmother nodded along from her rocking chair without even looking up. The whole family agreed something felt suspicious about physics that day. 2. A teenager on a fishing trip with his uncle pointed at a boat vanishing near the horizon. His uncle joked that ships never actually sink from view, they just become impossible to see because everyone's eyesight is terrible. The teenager squinted and admitted maybe his eyes were the real problem. His aunt overheard and burst out laughing from the dock. She said blaming human eyeballs for a boat disappearing was the funniest theory she had heard all summer. The uncle stayed completely serious the entire time. 3. A man moved into a new apartment with a very fast elevator. He told his neighbor tall elevators never need extra force to fight a spinning planet at high altitude. His neighbor asked if he had ever taken physics class. He said physics class was probably lying too. His teenage daughter overheard from the hallway and groaned loudly. She told her father the elevator was not proving anything about Earth at all. He shrugged and pressed the button again like it might confirm his theory once and for all, while his neighbor just walked away shaking his head. 4. An old woman filled her backyard pool every summer without fail. She told her grandchildren that water always finds its level, so the ocean could never be curved anywhere. Her grandson asked why pools never had hills built into them either. She smiled and said that was exactly the point she was making. Her daughter rolled her eyes from the patio chair nearby. The grandkids started arguing about whether oceans should have hills built into the curve somehow. The old woman kept refilling her watering can, completely satisfied she had just won the entire argument. 5. A young flight attendant once told a nervous passenger that pilots never point the nose down to follow a curve. The passenger asked how planes stay level over such a massive distance then. She said pilots simply fly straight, which obviously meant the Earth was flat. An elderly man across the aisle chuckled quietly under his breath. His wife nudged him and whispered that arguing with a flight attendant mid-flight seemed unwise. The passenger nodded slowly, still unconvinced but suddenly very interested in his in-flight magazine, flipping through it nervously the whole time. 6. A teenager once told his mother he had personally never fallen off the edge of the Earth. His mother asked what exactly that was supposed to prove to anyone. He said it proved there probably was no edge at all anywhere. His little sister interrupted and insisted there was an edge guarded by penguins somewhere far away. The mother stared at both of her children in complete silence for a moment. The father walked into the room and asked what he had missed entirely. Nobody could give him a straight answer, which somehow made the whole family laugh. 7. A young woman at a family barbecue claimed gravity was not real and that everything was actually about density instead. Her cousin asked why a feather always fell slower than a rock then. She said the feather was simply less dense, not because of any physics equation. Her uncle nearly choked on his burger from laughing so hard at that. Her grandmother asked what density even meant in the first place. The young woman confidently explained it was basically just vibes. The whole table went quiet before everyone burst out laughing at once together. 8. A hiking group stopped on a quiet trail to test how sound traveled outdoors that afternoon. One hiker insisted sound behaved identically in every direction, meaning the ground could not secretly be curving beneath them. Another hiker asked if he had checked this with any actual equipment first. He said his ears were equipment enough for this test. A woman near the back laughed and told him his ears were also failing to hear how ridiculous he sounded right now. The group kept arguing the entire way up the trail without stopping once. 9. A father driving his family across 3 states insisted time zones were nothing but a global trick invented years ago. He told his kids the sun never actually moved, only people's belief in clocks did. His teenage son asked why his phone still changed time zones automatically during the drive. The father said phones were part of the conspiracy too, obviously enough. His wife sighed from the passenger seat and turned up the radio louder. The kids exchanged looks in the back seat, quietly agreeing this road trip was getting stranger by the mile. 10. An elderly man at a diner told his nephew that satellites were nothing more than balloons with blinking lights attached. His nephew asked how balloons could possibly stream live television broadcasts around the world. The old man said that was simply advanced balloon technology nobody talked about openly. The waitress refilling their coffee laughed out loud without meaning to at all. The nephew asked if she believed in balloon satellites too now. She said she believed in tipping well, and left it at that, still smiling as she walked toward another table. 11. A history teacher told his class the Bedford level experiment settled everything back in the 1800s. A student asked if science had made any progress since then. He said obviously not, since that experiment already proved the Earth was flat forever. Another student raised her hand and asked why every modern satellite still worked perfectly. The teacher said satellites were part of the same old conspiracy from back then. The class exchanged confused looks with each other silently. The teacher moved on to the next slide without answering the question at all. 12. A young man showed his sister a video claiming every flat Earth debunking clip cut away right before showing curvature clearly. His sister asked if he had actually watched the entire video himself. He said watching the whole thing was exactly what they wanted him to do. His mother walked by and asked what conspiracy he was defending today. He said the truth was being hidden in plain sight from everyone. His sister laughed and told him plain sight was doing a lot of hiding lately for something so obvious. 13. An uncle at a family dinner insisted Antarctica was really just a giant ice wall guarded by militaries from every country. His niece asked why any government would waste money guarding an ice wall for centuries. He said the reasons were classified and nobody was allowed to know them. Her grandmother asked if he had ever actually been to Antarctica himself. He admitted he had not, but said photos existed somewhere online. The niece laughed and said photos existed of aliens too, according to some people she knew. 14. A tourist, standing near the Eiffel Tower, told his wife the tower should technically be invisible from far away if Earth really curved. His wife asked how they were both looking directly at it then. He said tourists were simply told lies about visibility every single day. Their teenage daughter groaned loudly and asked to just take the photo already. Her father ignored her and kept staring at the tower like it might vanish suddenly. The daughter rolled her eyes and walked ahead toward the entrance alone. 15. A teenager watching old moon landing footage told his older sister the bootlaces floated in obviously fake ways during the broadcast. His sister asked if he had ever actually seen bootlaces in zero gravity before. He said he had seen enough movies to know what real footage looked like. Their father walked in and asked what they were arguing about again today. The sister explained her brother thought astronauts were secretly actors on a set somewhere. Their father laughed and asked who was paying for such an elaborate secret. 16. A grandmother watching the sunset with her grandchildren told them the sun was actually just shrinking every single evening. Her granddaughter asked why it always grew back to the same size the next morning. The grandmother said the sun simply refilled itself overnight like a battery does. Her grandson asked where exactly the sun went to recharge each night. She said scientists were hiding that part from regular people like them. The grandchildren looked at each other and quietly agreed to ask their teacher tomorrow instead. 17. A father at the beach told his son gravity made no sense because the ocean never got sucked into the flat middle like a drain. His son asked what exactly the flat middle of the ocean was supposed to look like. The father said nobody had explained that part yet to regular people. His wife overheard and asked if he even believed what he was saying right now. He shrugged and said it sounded convincing enough on the internet last night. His son buried his father's sandal in the sand and walked away laughing. 18. An old man teaching his grandson how to use a compass explained that magnets simply liked the North Pole disk better than anywhere else. His grandson asked why compasses work the same way in every country he had visited. The old man said magnets were loyal to the disk no matter where you stood. His daughter overheard from the porch and asked where he learned that theory exactly. He said a very convincing man online had explained the entire thing clearly. His grandson kept spinning the compass anyway, just to watch it move. 19. A college student told his roommate that round Earth math relied entirely on pi, which never even ends properly. His roommate asked what that had to do with the actual shape of the planet. He said anything built on an untrustworthy number could not be trusted by anyone. His roommate reminded him pi was used to build the very bridge they drove over daily. The student paused for a moment and then said that bridge was probably flat too. Honestly, his roommate just shook his head and kept driving in silence. 20. A woman on a long flight told the passenger beside her that skipping the southern hemisphere on certain routes proved it barely existed. The passenger asked if she had checked a globe or map recently at all. She said maps were part of the same cover-up as everything else. Her husband across the aisle laughed and asked if Australia had personally offended her somehow. She said Australia was suspiciously never mentioned enough for a real continent. Her husband just shook his head and went back to his book quietly. 21. A father showed his teenage son an old moon landing clip and said the flag clearly waved in the wind despite being in a vacuum. His son asked how wind could exist somewhere with no air at all. The father said that detail was exactly the part nobody wanted explained. His wife walked by and asked why he was replaying the same video again tonight. He said the truth needed repeating until people finally woke up. His son sighed and put his headphones back on immediately. 22. A man bought a small level from a hardware store and told his neighbor he had personally measured zero curvature with it. His neighbor asked if a level from a hardware store could really measure something the size of a planet. He said good tools worked the same no matter how big the object was. His wife overheard and asked how far he had actually walked with the level. He admitted it was just across his own driveway that morning. His neighbor laughed and went back to mowing his lawn. 23. An old trucker told his nephew the Confederation Bridge stretched 8 miles perfectly straight with no curve built in anywhere. His nephew asked if bridges were even built to account for planetary curvature at all. The trucker said someone clearly forgot that step during construction decades ago. His wife riding along laughed and asked if engineers just forgot gravity too then. The trucker shrugged and said maybe they forgot a lot of things back then. His nephew stared out the window and said nothing more. 24. A young girl asked her grandfather why the stars stayed in the exact same spot every single night without moving. He told her the stars were simply painted onto a dome high above everyone. She asked who could possibly paint something that enormous and that far away. He said very talented painters nobody ever talked about publicly. Her mother overheard from the kitchen and laughed loudly at the explanation. The girl kept staring up at the ceiling, wondering if her own room had a dome too. 25. A delivery driver told his coworker that GPS worked far too accurately for the Earth to actually be a spinning, wobbling ball. His coworker asked how deliveries arrived correctly every single day then. The driver said accuracy like that only made sense on something fixed and flat. His coworker laughed and pointed at the map glowing on his dashboard screen. The driver shrugged and said screens could be programmed to lie convincingly. His coworker just shook his head and kept driving toward the next stop. 26. A woman at a family gathering claimed every photo of Earth from space came from the exact same rented weather balloon. Her cousin asked how one balloon could take so many different pictures from various positions. She said the same balloon was simply rented out repeatedly by different agencies. Her uncle laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink onto the table. Her cousin asked how a weather balloon could reach space in the first place honestly. She said that detail was still being investigated by very determined people online. 27. An old fisherman told his grandson the tides were caused by the moon breathing the ocean in and out slowly every day. His grandson asked why textbooks always credited gravity instead of breathing for the tides. The fisherman said Newton probably invented gravity just to sell more books back then. His wife laughed from the porch and asked if Newton needed the money that badly. The fisherman said everyone needed money at some point in history apparently. His grandson kept staring at the waves quietly confused. 28. A birdwatcher told his sister that a spinning ball Earth would make bird migration completely impossible for any species. His sister asked what exactly stopped birds from migrating on a spinning planet. He said birds had notoriously poor inner ear balance for something like that. His sister laughed and asked if he had ever personally tested a bird's inner ear. He admitted he had not, but felt confident about the theory anyway. His sister shook her head and kept watching the birds fly past them. 29. A photography student told his professor that every curved Earth photo from high-altitude balloons used a fisheye lens that curved everything. His professor asked if he understood how fisheye lenses actually distorted images. The student said the lens curved even flat parking lots so nothing could be trusted. His classmate laughed and asked if his own photos were secretly curving reality too. The student paused and admitted he had never actually checked his own camera settings. His classmate laughed even harder at that answer. 30. A young woman told her roommate that every scientist claiming Earth was round secretly worked for NASA no matter their actual job. Her roommate asked if marine biologists studying fish were really employed by a space agency too. She said even marine biologists were somehow involved in the larger cover-up. Her roommate laughed and asked how deep this conspiracy could possibly go at this point. She said it went deeper than anyone was truly ready to accept. Her roommate just laughed and turned the television back on. 31. A film student told his friend that Moondust behaved differently across different videos, which definitely proved something suspicious was going on. His friend asked if camera settings could explain those differences instead of a conspiracy. The student said camera settings were just an excuse people used to dismiss real evidence. His sister overheard and asked if he had ever adjusted a camera himself before. He admitted he had not, but insisted his theory still made perfect sense somehow. His sister laughed and told him to actually try photography sometime soon. 32. An airline mechanic told his coworker commercial planes never flew above 40,000 feet because that was roughly where they would bump into a dome. His coworker asked why altitude limits were never mentioned in any pilot training manuals then. The mechanic said manuals were carefully edited to avoid mentioning the dome at all. His wife overheard from the break room and asked if planes ever complained about hitting anything. He said pilots were simply trained not to talk about it publicly. His coworker laughed and went back to checking the engine. 33. A weather enthusiast told his uncle that storms spun differently below the equator, which was clearly suspicious and unexplainable to regular people. His uncle asked if he had researched the actual reason behind that pattern first. He said a very confident person on the internet explained it just fine already. His aunt laughed from the kitchen and asked if that person had a weather degree at all. He said confidence mattered more than degrees when explaining things clearly. His uncle shook his head and changed the television channel. 34. A retired teacher told her neighbor that sundials in different cities all showed the exact same shadow angle at solar noon somehow. Her neighbor asked how that was even possible if the sun's light traveled differently everywhere. She said that consistency proved there was no curve tilting sunlight at all anywhere. Her neighbor asked if she had personally checked sundials in more than one city herself. She admitted she had only checked her own backyard sundial carefully. Her neighbor laughed and offered to check a second city together sometime. 35. A photographer showed his sister a picture of buildings across a bay, claiming they should tilt away from each other if Earth curved. His sister asked why the buildings looked perfectly parallel in every single photo he owned. He said photographers were trained to hide the tilt using clever camera angles constantly. His mother overheard and asked if he trusted his own photography skills at all anymore. He said his skills were fine, but everyone else's cameras were suspicious somehow. His sister laughed and asked to see the photo again closely. 36. A man at a coffee shop told his friend the sun was only 3,000 miles away, and roughly the size of a large parking lot. His friend asked where exactly that measurement had originally come from. He said a very thorough forum post had calculated it carefully using simple math. His friend asked if the forum post included any actual telescope data at all. He said telescopes were expensive and mostly unnecessary for this kind of calculation. His friend laughed and ordered another coffee before responding further. 37. A father explained to his daughter that solar eclipses were just the sun and moon taking turns passing each other on parallel tracks above the disk. His daughter asked why eclipses only happened on specific predictable dates every single year then. He said the sun and moon simply kept a very strict and reliable schedule. His wife laughed from across the room and asked who exactly organized that schedule for them. He said nobody knew, but it worked perfectly regardless of the explanation. His daughter shrugged and went back to her homework quietly. 38. A conspiracy blogger told his roommate every rocket launch was filmed at an angle specifically designed to hide the edge of the flat disk. His roommate asked why rocket companies would bother hiding something so massive from the public. The blogger said hiding the edge protected a secret worth billions of dollars apparently. His roommate laughed and asked if he had ever actually watched a launch in person himself. He admitted he had only watched clips online from his couch. His roommate shook his head and went back to his book. 39. An engineer told his nephew that if gravity were truly real, Skyscrapers would slowly flatten out over time, from constant pressure pushing down. His nephew asked why skyscrapers built decades ago still stood at their exact original height today. The engineer said maybe measurements were simply being rounded incorrectly by professionals everywhere. His sister overheard and asked if he trusted any measurements at all anymore honestly. He said trusting official numbers felt riskier than trusting his own gut feeling. His nephew laughed and looked up at the nearest building nervously. 40. A retired pilot told his grandson that maps used by pilots for centuries were always flat, which obviously meant the thing being mapped was flat too. His grandson asked why globes existed in classrooms if maps alone proved everything already. The pilot said globes were mostly decorative and rarely used for actual navigation purposes. His daughter laughed from the kitchen and asked how he had navigated real flights for 30 years then. He said instincts mattered more than any map or globe combined. His grandson kept spinning the classroom globe anyway out of curiosity. 41. A young boy asked a grandmother why the moon always showed the exact same face every single night without changing. A grandmother told him someone was clearly rotating a large poster on a string somewhere far above them. An older sister laughed from the couch and asked if they got paid overtime for that job. The boy asked who could possibly manage a job like that every single night. A grandmother said very patient workers handled it quietly without ever getting credit publicly. The boy kept staring out the window trying to spot the string himself. 42. A photography teacher told a class that deep space photos were fake because stars never twinkled properly in any of them. A student asked if twinkling was even something cameras were supposed to capture clearly. An older student mentioned atmosphere might explain the difference between ground photos and space photos entirely. A teacher said twinkling was basically the entire point of a real star existing at all. The teacher paused for a moment and quickly changed the subject to lighting techniques instead. The class exchanged confused glances but said nothing further. 43. A hot air balloon pilot told a passenger he never had to tilt the basket to stay level with any curving horizon at all. A passenger asked how the basket managed to stay level automatically the entire flight then. A pilot said the basket simply trusted the ground to remain perfectly flat below it. An anxious passenger laughed nervously and gripped the edge of the basket a little tighter. A wife watching from below shouted up asking if he was scaring the tourists again. The pilot waved down cheerfully and kept flying without concern. 44. A mother told a son that snow could not possibly fall evenly on both hemispheres if the Earth were actually round somehow. A son asked why he had personally seen snow footage from countries on opposite sides of the planet before. A mother said footage could easily be staged using very convincing studio equipment nowadays. A daughter overheard and asked if their own backyard's snow last winter was staged too then. The mother paused for a long moment before changing the subject entirely. A daughter smiled and quietly built a snowman outside. 45. A submarine engineer told a niece that submarines could never dive too deep because they would eventually hit the bottom of the flat disk. A niece asked why depth limits were always explained using water pressure in her school textbooks instead. An engineer said pressure was simply the official cover story taught to students everywhere. A mother laughed from the kitchen and asked if he had ever actually operated a real submarine himself. An engineer admitted he had only seen submarines in documentaries growing up. A niece laughed and went back to her homework. 46. A geography teacher told a class the equator was not hotter because of the sun's angle, but because it sat closer to the disk's center heat source. A student asked what exactly was generating heat at the center of a flat disk. A teacher said the source was still being researched by very dedicated independent thinkers online. An older student asked if any of those thinkers had actual science degrees at all. A teacher admitted degrees were not required for this kind of important research. The class quietly exchanged confused looks with each other. 47. A father told a son boomerangs worked specifically because the Earth was flat and objects naturally wanted to return to a flat plane eventually. A son asked why boomerangs still worked perfectly fine even when thrown near a curved hillside nearby. A father said hills were simply small exceptions that did not disprove the larger flat pattern. A wife laughed from the yard and asked if basketballs also longed to return to a flat plane too. A father said basketballs were a completely different and unrelated case entirely. A son shrugged and threw the boomerang again. 48. A river guide told tourists on a boat that rivers only flowed downhill toward the ocean, and never uphill over any mythical curve anywhere. A tourist asked if that observation actually proved anything about the planet's overall shape at all. A guide said a flat, tilted platter explained downhill flow far better than any curved model ever could. An amused tourist laughed and asked what exactly was tilting the entire platter in the first place. A guide admitted that part was still somewhat unclear to him personally. The tourists laughed and kept floating downstream calmly. 49. A hunter told a nephew that if Earth truly rotated once every 24 hours, a bullet fired north would land miles off target every single time. A nephew asked if hunters actually accounted for that kind of rotation during real hunts. A hunter said skilled hunters simply adjusted their aim naturally without even realizing why. A wife laughed from the porch and asked if instinct alone could really outsmart planetary rotation. A hunter said good instincts had never failed him once in 30 years of hunting. A nephew nodded slowly, still unsure what to believe. So there you have it, 49 reasons some people would rather trust a hardware store level than an actual planet. If any of these had you laughing out loud or yelling at your screen, you know exactly what to do next. Hit that like button. Subscribe to BrainFumble if you have not already, because trust us, the internet needs more of this. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next batch of confident nonsense. Share this with the one friend who still argues about this at parties. Now drop a comment and tell us which point made you laugh the hardest.